Violent protests continued in Mexico today. Demonstrators clashed with police in Acapulco as anger mounted over the disappearance of 43 students. Late last week, 3 men detained in the case admitted to setting fire to the victims. Government investigators say they found dozens of charred bodies. They're still working on confirming the identities. Many throughout the country have been critical of Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto's response. Tonight, we take a look at another less attention-getting but still severe issue facing Mexico, the water shortage in its capital city. NewsHour special correspondent Fred de Sam Lazaro filed this report, part of our series, Agents for Change.
Every day, long lines of water tankers fill up at pumping stations, 4,000 gallons on each truck, enough for 2 homes for about a week. It's not an emergency or drought. This is normal practice in Mexico City. With a population of 22 million, it's like filling a swimming pool with a teacup. Environment scientist Juan Jose Santibáñez did the math for one large neighborhood.
In Iztapalapa, there are 1,000 trucks distributing water to 2 million people, which is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of those people.
It's expensive, inefficient, and customers like Sylvester Fernandez, a struggling cab driver, are not satisfied.
Sometimes it takes 1 or up to 5 days after we request it. And sometimes we can't buy other things, like diapers for the baby, because we have to pay for water.
The alternative, really the only choice for many of the poorest, is self-service from a municipal tap. Amelia Segura trudges down and then back up a steep mountain, jerry cans on the back of 3 donkeys, which her husband, Indalicia Bonilla, helps unload.
It's really hard. It takes 20 minutes to go down the hill, and then we have to walk back up. We collect enough for about 3 days when it rains. When it's dry, we need more.
The city struggles to meet the pressing demand. Water is pumped up from aquifers and also piped in from a neighboring province. It's purified in plants like this, but here there's also a shortage of trust. Mexicans consume more bottled water than any other nation. One reason is that less than 10% of the metro area's sewage is treated. The rest flows in open canals, often washed up with rains that flood this bowl-shaped city, overwhelming many homes in poor neighborhoods. These pictures are from a documentary called H2O MX. The director, Jose Cohen, said he wanted to inject a sense of urgency about this growing crisis.
We found out that it's an extremely serious health emergency, and there's a lot of social injustice going on.
There is a very high probability that by 2020 there will be a mini revolution, at least in Mexico City.
No one disagrees the dwindling supply and growing population are leading to a severe crisis, yet there seems to be little momentum to do something about it. For one thing, where to start?
Work crews are shutting off the water supply to this neighborhood so they can plug a leak a few hundred yards down the street. The problem is not that there are a few big leaks, but rather thousands of small ones across miles and miles of underground piping. Mexico City loses 1,000 liters of water per second through this system.
40% of the water that is available to the valley is lost in leaks.
Almost half of it.
Almost half of it. And 60% of the water that we use comes from the aquifer, the one that is drying.
Not only do people not get water, extracting it from aquifers below is causing the ground to sink.
You see evidence of it in buildings that are tilting precariously, as this one is doing in the Basilica of Guadalupe complex, one of Mexico City's most historic landmarks. Geologists say this city has sunk more than 40 feet in the last half-century.
Enrique Lomnitz moved back to his native Mexico from the U.S. 5 years ago, anxious to put his industrial design degree from MIT to work.
Everywhere I went, people were talking about water, about how they used to have more water, how they used to have higher quality water, how water was getting more expensive. I started thinking about, well, to me it was a very obvious question, why aren't people using rainwater?
So Lomnitz started a social enterprise that installs rainwater collection and storage systems in businesses and homes.
This part of the city gets very high rainfall. It gets up to 1,500 millimeters. So a house like the one we're in right now, for example, has 240 meters of roof, which is about enough for 2 low-income families to go all year.
In 5 years, Lomnitz's group has installed 1,500 such systems. Not many, he admits, but there are big obstacles. Homeowners simply can't or won't pay the $1,000 cost. As for the government helping out,
I've had people ask me for bribes, for example. They could put up a couple 100,000 rainwater harvesting systems in their municipality, and they'll basically say, this project will go to you, but what's going to come to me?
Another complication, politicians are limited to just 1 term.
So as soon as people take office, they're actually looking for a future somewhere else. I think if all of the buildings were harvesting rainwater, I think we'd be talking about at least something like 30% of the city's water needs could be coming from rainwater harvesting.
But Ramon Aguirre, who heads the city's water department, thinks that number is much lower, since rainfall varies widely across the city.
It's less than 10%, and that's being generous. To build infrastructure to capture the water, store the water, purify the water, it's just not financially viable.
His department has developed a comprehensive repair plan.
We're talking about collecting rainwater, fixing the leaks in the whole system, increasing the use of recycled water, which can be used for bathing and recharging the aquifers, and generally lowering consumption of water.
The problem? A price tag that's 4 times the amount of money he gets in his department.
Water is a basic service, and it's very politicized. We have one of the lowest rates in the country when we should have some of the highest, but they are politically set. To compensate for the very low rates, we need very big subsidies from the government, which we don't get.
So for the foreseeable future, he expects to worry more about containing social unrest, dispatching more tanker and repair trucks like he does today, than about the long-term problems that are literally sinking one of the world's largest cities. In Mexico City, I'm Fred DeSam Lazaro for the NewsHour.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at St. Mary's University of Minnesota.